Okay.
Okay. The next part of our lecture or workshop will be scientific writing by Dr. Thormay. Thormay has been a researcher, lecturer, teacher, trainer, and writer. Earlier, he also had a wide variety of other jobs. Since 1976, he has taught in universities and colleges in Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, China for 5 years, and South Korea for 7 years. His PhD was on teaching productivity using 20 personally researched case studies from 7 countries. About 150 of his articles and papers are now available in his online repository. In Adelaide, Australia, for now runs a meetup for new immigrants and another for critical thinking called Active Thinkers For and Against. He is a lifelong distance runner. Very impressive. I think it's your turn to begin.
Okay. Richard, before we begin, will it be possible for me to switch over to PowerPoint slides using my system here?
I think so. I think Han will assist you with that.
So when you click share the screen, so it will be able to transfer to your screen automatically. So you click share screen down the bottom. You see share screen on the green button over there, and then just click on your screen.
Screen sharing.
Yeah, no worries. Please do that. Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There are quite a lot of you, as I can see. I'm very pleased to be talking with you, and thank you to the sponsor and the organizers of YIS, and a special thanks to Nghia Vo, who will be helping me with interpretation. Hello, Nghia, how you going? I haven't worked with an interpreter before, so he'll have to interrupt me sometimes. I'll try not to talk too much. Nghia, do you need to interpret this introduction too?
I don't think so, because that is simple, and I heard that our student is good in English, so the introduction is, yeah.
Okay, right. Well, here we are, you know, we're having a meeting separated by 6,000 kilometers. I'm in Adelaide, South Australia, and we can speak instantly. So do we really need writing? You know, you can go to TikTok, you can see everything you like. Well, I think yes. Without writing, even the technology which joins us this morning would not be possible. Writing is needed for the complicated things in our lives. You're clever, so you need to be good writers. That's a skill that takes practice. Now, this is the 4th week of your program. You've already heard a lot from other speakers. Some things I say today might not be new to you. That's okay. They probably need repeating. We're scheduled for 2 hours. I pre-recorded this session and it came out about 1 hour, 10 minutes, but we're interpreting, so it'll take longer. That's way too long to listen to a talking head. You have my sympathy. We'll probably have some little breaks, and in those breaks, if you want, anybody through Nghia can ask me a question. If you think I can answer it, okay, I'm happy to try. In other sessions, you've done some workshop exercises in breaks. We can't really do that with writing because, you know, writing is the sort of thing you need to go away in a corner and think about it. You need a quiet place. And that doesn't really work in a break room on Zoom. But like I said, you can ask me any questions. Now, I'm a specialist in language and linguistics. I've also worked in 7 countries. I have a pretty good general knowledge. I'm interested, but I'm not a specialist in science, technology, engineering, and math. So if you ask me any curly questions, any difficult questions in those topics, I won't be able to answer you. Okay, I do follow these things, but I haven't got a deep knowledge. All right. So the material today I present today will later be published in an article. In fact, I published it last night on Academia. Your sponsor, your coordinator can give you the address of that. And Nievo, I think, has also agreed to provide a Vietnamese translation to be published. That means it can get to more people, okay? At the end of these slides are 3 assignments, and I encourage you to try the assignments. Okay, so let's now get on with the topic. By the way, the camera's off a little to the left, and I'm reading straight ahead, so I'll look a bit shifty-eyed, but never mind. Okay, so the topic is called How to Write a STEM Paper, illustrated with a simple example, a simple experiment. So in a STEM paper, oh, okay, we're going to get both Vietnamese and English on the slide. That's great. Okay, so I'm sure you're aware of this already. A STEM paper usually contains these sections: an abstract. The abstract example I give you today is very short because it's a simple experiment. My PhD dissertation, for example, was 400 pages, so the abstract is actually much longer. And maybe some things that you write will need a longer abstract, okay? So an abstract, an introduction, method and materials, results, discussion, a conclusion, and references, all right? So this presentation will contain all of those sections in a basic form. In this way, we can demonstrate how a STEM paper works, okay? Can you switch to the next one? Yeah, or...
Next slide, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next slide.
Okay. So the STEM paper will also report on a simple experiment, as I mentioned, and this is only an illustration, an example, right? And I'd like you all to repeat this experiment. You know, it's a simple thing. And repeating experiments is the best way to test them. It's really the best way to test them. So some sections in this presentation will contain extra explanations to help new researchers and students. You might not find such explanations in a normal STEM paper. And in fact, to make our presentation today a little shorter, I've left out some of that material, but it's in the published material, okay? Next slide, 3, 4. Okay, so like everyone, I'm lazy. When I began to do this, I thought, oh, who has done this before? So like everyone else, I went and looked on the internet and I found a really good example from Indiana University. So it's an excellent summary of writing a scientific paper. And I'm going to quote from that summary at the beginning of each section here. why invent the wheel twice? Okay, so, okay, can we go on? 5. So here's the abstract from Indiana University. Abstracts are a summary of the research as a whole and should familiarize the reader with the purpose of the research. As I mentioned already, you know, sometimes abstracts are very short and sometimes they're rather longer. They'll always, though, be written last, even though they are the first paragraph in a scientific paper. Why? Well, you can't write the abstract until you know how the experiment went. But the person reading it will want to see the abstract to get a rough idea of the experiment. So, okay. Unlike a lab report, all scientific papers will have an abstract, okay? And all dissertations, by the way, too. So, here's a guide for what should be in an abstract. You answer questions. That's the best way to organize your brain. You know, we'll talk more about that later. Why was the research done? Not always an easy question to answer, especially to strangers. You know, the head of the university might know what you're doing. What problem is being addressed? What's the particular problem you have? What results were found? What are the meanings? See, Indiana University made a grammar mistake. And I copied it. Can you see it? What are the meaning? That should be what is the meaning, or what are the meanings of the results? So when you're writing, always go back and check your own writing. I make mistakes like that too all the time. All right. So how is the problem better understood now than before, if at all? Sometimes you finish up more confused than when you began, or you have more questions. That's very common. All right, 7. Okay, so this is my abstract from my simple experiment, okay? And some of it you won't understand in the beginning, but it'll become clear later. So a simple experiment of hand grip strengthening was conducted to illustrate the principles, of scientific research. That means some principles, okay? Now, notice I did not say, I did a simple experiment. It's not personal. You know, when you're writing a scientific paper, you don't put I in there, not usually, okay? So in English, we use passive very often. I don't think you have a passive in Vietnamese, I'm not sure. No, that makes it tricky. So the experiment, that's my experiment, the experiment addressed other research findings that eccentric muscle contraction is superior to concentric muscle contraction in terms of duration and frequency in increasing muscle strength. So that means when you squeeze a muscle, that's contracting it, and when you're releasing it, okay, that's called eccentric. Concentric is squeezing, you know, and eccentric is when you're releasing muscle. But you'll see more of that as we go through. All right, next bit. 8. So this experiment was conducted over 46 days. Some days I had trouble remembering. I thought, yeah, I didn't do it. So by a single subject, the subject means the person in the experiment. So usually your subjects won't be you. There'll be other people probably. But in this case, it was me. And a single subject, that's not enough for an experiment, really. So a single subject using his left hand to measure strength changes from concentric contraction, that's squeezing. So I'd squeeze slowly and release quickly. And his right hand to measure strength changes, from eccentric contraction. And I'd squeeze quickly and release slowly, okay? And hey, the experiment failed. I'm a failure. The experiment failed to demonstrate any significant change in grip strength using either eccentric or concentric muscle contraction. Now, you're a lot younger than me. Maybe it'll work for you better and faster. I don't know. However, you know, as an illustration of process, the experiment served its purpose, right? So it's good enough for us. 9. Okay, so the next part of your STEM paper would be the introduction. And that will repeat some of the things we've already seen in the abstract, but give more detail. So the introduction of a scientific paper discusses the problem being studied and other theory that is relevant to understanding the findings. You know, if you've got a complicated area of research, there are usually many theories about what is going on. So you need to give an outline of what those are too. There's an hypothesis. The hypothesis means sort of what if, what we think this will happen. Yeah? The hypothesis of the experiment and the motivation for the research, why are you doing it, are stated in this section. Write the introduction in your own words. Okay, don't give it to ChatGPT. Okay, we try not to copy from a lab manual or other guidelines. Instead, show comprehension of the research by briefly explaining the problem. Show that you know what you're talking about. Otherwise, people won't respect what you're doing. Okay, 10. Okay, so from here on, we're talking about, where are we? Okay, so the remainder of this presentation will report on the simple experiment, as I've been repeating, okay? The result of the experiment doesn't matter much. Instead, the experimental report will show one example of writing a STEM paper. In the future, you'll probably write much longer and more complicated papers, and probably in a team too, which is different. However, the pattern of writing will be similar to what you find here, what you report here. Okay. Next, 17. Now, even simple experiments take time and use resources. Both the experiment and later reporting of it will flow much more smoothly if all records, information, and materials are carefully organized first. Hey, this is important. You won't believe me until you try to do it yourself. For example, it's a very good idea to keep a project diary. For this talk today, from the very beginning, I kept a project diary. I said, okay, Nia wrote me an email and said this, blah, blah. And I replied on this date and said this. You know, it's very useful. Later you can go back and check, right? You need a project timeline. When will you do this? When will you do that? A list of resources. You know, I needed this hand squeezer thing. A list of contacts. What people do you need to keep in touch with, right? And a list of references, and that will grow as your research goes on. And also hey, you're doing a lot of statistics, math, all kinds of things. You have a special directory for data files. Don't get lost and confused, right? And above all, always back everything up. You'll come to the last day and your computer will die and it's all gone, right? And that has happened to so many people. Be careful. Okay, so here's our research question. Does eccentric muscle release strengthen muscles more efficiently than concentric muscle contraction? So here maybe you'll learn a little bit about muscles, right? There are 3 known ways to make a muscle stronger, and this research tries to explore 2 of those ways. Okay, 19. So isometric contraction means putting a muscle under stress without moving it. For example, just standing still, standing up. You're standing up against gravity, right? So standing up in the street means that many body muscles are tensed to keep balance. That's isometric contraction, right? By the way, they're quite useful isometric exercises too. You can check them out. Concentric contraction means that a muscle shortens when it moves to do work, like picking up a weight or squeezing my wrist strengthener. Eccentric release means the muscle lengthens gradually when it's released, not just let it go, right? You lengthen it gradually, like putting down a weight. Okay, 20. Now, okay, where did I get these ideas? I found some sports science researchers. So some research in sports science, like Nosaka in 2022, has suggested that eccentric release strengthens muscles more quickly than concentric or isometric contraction. And if that's true, you know, it's sort of important because a lot of people now are doing muscle exercises. And a lot of them think that only the concentric contraction makes it stronger. So this is quite useful. Okay, 21. Where do we skip? Oh, yeah, right. So the demonstration experiment in this paper proposes an hypothesis. Now, first, I'll give you a positive hypothesis. And in a lot of science, you actually use a negative hypothesis. I'll give you one of those in a moment. So it's hypothesized that hand grip strength can be increased, A, more quickly, and B, to a greater degree by concentrating on eccentric muscle release rather than concentric muscle contraction, right? So that's our idea we're working with. Or 22. So in much research, a negative hypothesis is used rather than a positive hypothesis. Probably the other presenters have talked about this. And that's because it's often easier or more reliable to show that something is not the case rather than it definitely is the case. In this demonstration experiment, a negative hypothesis might look like the following. It is hypothesized that an improvement in hand grip strength is not differently affected by whether work is done by a muscle in concentric phase or eccentric phase. Okay. Next, 20. Now, for the purposes of this experiment over 46 days, twice a day squeezing, sometimes I forgot one of them. The researcher used one hand to squeeze a grip exercises slowly, then release it quickly. I've already told you that. It's concentric focus. He used the other to squeeze it, exercise it quickly, then release it slowly. The results were tabulated daily using an electronic hand dynamometer. That's a little machine that measures the grip strength. Why am I saying this stuff over and over again in such detail? Because if you come along and try the same experiment, you need to see exactly what I did. So a good report will in some ways be very boring. It will say the same thing so many times, but in detail, so anybody else can do it again. Okay, 24. The next section in a report would be methods and materials. And in our case, it's pretty simple. In some research, you know, something like the I can't pronounce this, cyclotron. So that huge machine they use in Europe, you know, to break atoms apart. It's fast. It costs millions of dollars. That's their method. Their materials. You know, here I've got a $5 hand squeezer. So the methods and materials section provides an overview of any equipment, apparatus, or other substances used in the experiment, as well as the steps taken, right? You have to explain what the steps are, step by step, right, during the experiment. And if using any specific, that's particular amounts of materials, make sure the amount is listed. You know, how much of this magic stuff did you put in the pippin? You know? And list the steps taken as they actually happen during the experiment, not as they were supposed to happen. That's different. You know, very often you start out with a plan and you have to change it a little bit. So what you report is what you actually did in the order that you really did it. Okay, 26. Okay, well, of course, I also used a spreadsheet, and I won't bore you in going through all those numbers, which don't change very much. But so the materials used in the demonstration experiment comprised a hand grip exerciser, an electronic hand dynamometer, and a spreadsheet for tracking grip changes. All right, I think I gave you a picture of these little machines also. Next bit. 27, yeah, so it's a hand grip exerciser. The hand dynamometer, I'm sure you can get that in Vietnam a lot cheaper than it cost me about $30, I think, but it's useful. All right, so that's what I'm using for the experiment. And now I go into really boring detail about how I held the grip for each part of it, you know? So the points of hand grip exercised in this experiment were as follows, you know? Okay, a hand grip using only the finger sections from the fingertip to the first joint of the hand, you know? That's usually the weakest part. Then B, a hand grip using the finger sections between the second and third joints. That's usually stronger. And C, a hand grip using only the thumb section from the thumb tip to the first joint, and a hand grip using only the thumb section below the first joint. Okay, like I said, boring, but you have to give the detail. All right, 29. So the daily procedure of the experiment was as follows. Each grip position on each hand 10 times, exercise each grip position on each hand 10 times, twice per day. And the left hand grip exercise involved squeezing each grip position slowly to the maximum, then releasing it quickly. And the right hand grip exercise involved squeezing each grip position quickly to the maximum, then releasing slowly. I told you that before, didn't I? But we're giving it in terrible detail. Okay, 30. So After all grip exercises had been completed using the grip exerciser device, all grip positions on each hand were tested once, okay? I used the squeezy 10 times, but I only used a dynamometer once. So hand dynamometer tests were completing using a slow squeeze for the left hand and a fast squeeze for the right hand. And E, hand dynamometer results for all hand grip positions were recorded twice daily on a spreadsheet, and any changes noted. Hey, there weren't many changes. Okay. Okay, so when you get through all that stuff, and you've done your experiments, then you get results, hopefully. So Indiana University says these things should be in the results. The results show the data was collected. The data that was collected or found during research. It should explain in words the data that was collected. You know, some people are very good at interpreting numbers or graphs, and other people are really bad at that. And some people can't understand words as well, but they understand graphs and numbers. So you have to do both. Explain in words the data that was collected, right? If using graphs, charts, or other figures, present them in the results section of the lab report, okay? And the tables should be labeled numerically, you know, obviously, you know, table 1, table 2, and so on. Other figures should be labeled numerically, like figure 1, figure 2. Calculations to understand the data can also be presented in the results. For our little experiment, this is not difficult, okay? But when you've got really complicated math, you really need to tell people how you did it, you know? So that's in your results. (32). So the results of the simple hand grip experiment are shown in figures 1 and 2. The raw dynamometer grip readings were entered on a spreadsheet. That's table 1. I made that as an attachment. The tabulation, that means the table, was then converted to a graph. By the way, in English, graph or graph, they're both good English. Some words we have in free variation like that. So converted to a graph showing changes in strength for the 8 grip positions over 46 days. That's figures 1 and 2. Okay, so ta-da! As you can see, not a whole lot changed. Well, to my inexpert eye, I'm not an expert, maybe you can see impressive changes, I can't. Okay, but you know, you put it on a graph and everybody can see it. So that's what we got out of our little experiment. Okay, 35. So here I'm putting it into words, you see, not just the graph. After a slight initial increase, initial means in the beginning, after a slight initial increase, all grip positions in either, we can say either or either, English again, in either hand showed no significant change in grip strength over the 46-day period of the experiment. Doesn't change much, right? Thus, the hypothesis that hand grip strength can be increased, A, more quickly, and B, to a greater degree by concentrating on eccentric muscle release rather than concentric muscle contraction, was not demonstrated. You know, our hypothesis, our positive hypothesis failed in this experiment. That's okay, you know. Most experiments fail, that's a secret. Okay, which you'll come to realize. Now, after you give your results, you have a discussion. That is, you know, hey, I did this experiment, These were the results. What happened? Why did it happen like this? So Indiana University summary puts it like this: the discussion section is one of the most important parts of a scientific paper. That lets other people read your brain. Okay, they can see what you're thinking. It analyzes the results of the research and is a discussion of the data. If any results are unexpected, explain why they're unexpected and how they did or did not affect the data obtained. You know, you mightn't be able to explain it, but you can try. Okay, 37. Analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the design of the research. That's important. You know, you have to be honest, and compare your results to similar research. You know, what did the other guys find? And if there are any experimental errors, admit them. And so, you know, there's quite too much research where they don't admit their errors, you know. Admit any experimental errors and analyze them. What went wrong exactly? Explain your results and discuss them using relevant terms and theories. You know, that's what other people understand. Other people in your field understand your language, yeah? And when writing a discussion, try to answer these questions. What do the results indicate? What is the significance of the results? Are there any gaps in the knowledge? And are there any new questions that have been raised? And if it's good research, there will often be new questions to answer. Okay, 39. So back to our little experiment. Possible limitations of the demonstration experiment. A single experimental subject, me, the participant, is a very weak base for any scientific conclusion. It's almost an opinion, right? So you are maths guys, you know, the bigger your sample, the better. B, the amount of daily exercise for muscle strengthening might not have been the optimum. I mightn't have done enough reps. The slang in English for doing repetitions is a rep. You'll hear that in gymnasiums a lot. Okay, I didn't maybe do enough reps, enough repetitions. The 46-day experimental period also might have been too brief to show useful changes. You know, maybe we needed more time. By the way, I'm still doing this every day. Still hoping. Okay, 30, 40, okay. And, you know, the age of the experimental subject. Hey guys, I'm ancient, you know, 77 years old. My God, why am I still alive? You know, that might have influenced the degree of muscle strengthening. Although, you know, there's evidence that you can strengthen muscles at any age. We're finding out more and more of this. It's amazing. So I'm not quite dead yet. All right. And also D, and this is quite likely, the experimenter may have misinterpreted existing experimental evidence. You know, maybe I got the wrong message from the research that I read. And, you know, hey, I'm not a sports scientist. It's quite possible that I got the wrong message. So I might have got the wrong message on existing experimental evidence on concentric muscle contraction and eccentric muscle release. And indeed, you know, when I looked for the research, you know, some existing experimental reports seem to have conflicting conclusions. This is so common, you know, especially with complicated stuff. All right, 41. And hey, you know, I'm not a mathematician either. So the statistical analysis of the outcomes may have been flawed. There may have been weaknesses in the stats that or the meaning I get out of the statistics. And also, of course, there may have been weaknesses in the experimental design overlooked by the researcher. It's likely that the actual hand movements did not properly exploit the differences between concentric contraction and eccentric contraction. And I gave you a reference there to Casturo. I found that later. He's a very straight talking guy. It's a YouTube reference. It's quite, if you're interested in this sort of thing at all, it's worth having a look at him. He's a smart guy and he contradicts a lot of the existing research. All right, 42. Okay. And, you know, in your STEM paper, finally, oh, thank God, you come to the conclusion, right? And a conclusion is a summation of the experiment, you know, and it puts it all together. It should clearly and concisely, so not too long, you know, concisely, state what was learned and its importance. And if there's any future work that needs to be done, it can be explained in the conclusion. And okay, 43. So for me, for us, for our little experiment, the experiment was a simple demonstration of research method. That's what we did. The simplicity, you know, it wasn't complicated. The simplicity itself meant that many problems which arise in the method and interpretation of more complex problems did not arise in this experiment. However, you know, as a demonstration, I think it served its purpose. Okay. Next. The hand grip strengthening experiment in its own terms, that means as about hand grip strengthening, did not establish the positive hypothesis that eccentric muscle contraction is more efficient than concentric muscle contraction or in strengthening muscles. It weakly, now that's important, it weakly established a negative hypothesis. I didn't emphasize the negative hypothesis because what we found wasn't very useful. It weakly established a negative hypothesis that neither eccentric nor concentric muscle contraction had an advantage over the other for muscle strengthening. That was weak because there wasn't much muscle strengthening of any kind, okay? Not much change. All right. And so if any of you enthusiastic researchers go out and repeat my experiment, some things you might change or do better are these. You know, a future repetition of the hand grip experiment could be more rigorous, that means more thorough, by A, increasing the number of daily repetitions, B, increasing the number of experimental participants. You know, get a bunch of guys that you know, not just one person. C, extending the duration of the experiment, do it for more than 46 days. D, controlling the hand movements. You might have to train for that a little bit more carefully to distinguish concentric and eccentric contraction. And E, a more sophisticated, you know, smarter, cleverer statistical analysis of the changes would also be beneficial, be good. All right. Well, when you're doing a real STEM paper, you're quite choosy, you're quite selective about your references. So when any outside sources are used, I'm quoting Indiana University, to support a claim or explain background information, those sources must be cited in the references section of the lab report. You don't want to be accused of plagiarism, right? So quote everything, right? And scientific papers will always, well, nearly always use outside references, not just things that you've done, you know, outside references also. Okay, 47. Okay, well, what we did here today was a bit different. We weren't writing a real STEM paper. And after all, this presentation is about how to write a STEM paper, not actually doing it truly. So the references quoted in this paper are not properly comparable. We can't really compare them to the references found in a regular research paper, regular research papers. Normally, a research paper would quote other research only from refereed papers. I'm sure you know what a refereed paper is. You write it and you send it out to other people and they decide whether it's rubbish or not. And then they might agree that it's okay, right? That's a refereed paper. So refereed papers in recognized specialist journals, not some journal you paid $1,000 for to publish, right? Real specialist journals, as well as other specialist publications. Now, the stuff that I picked here, the materials referenced here, are deliberately chosen from the open internet, from open internet sources, with no particular attention to quality. The aim has been to make some background information and ideas available to the widest possible group of non-specialist readers. I wanted any of you to be able to go to the internet and find these references, okay? They are not locked up in a library somewhere. Okay, 48. All right, so like you, I went straight to Google and I put in some search words. Now, when you do a Google search, that is an art, because the questions you ask will control the answers you get. And if you ask Google dumb questions, you're not going to get much information, right? So I did a Google search, okay, and I could have done more, of course. So I'm not going to go through all the references here. You can read those later. It wouldn't help us today to go through them all. I see that the British Council, for example, is doing stuff on this. I used Indiana University. Here are some other ones, just flick through them. Okay. And then, of course, I had to find some stuff for our little trial experiment. And so I've given you a list of those. Some of those I've given you YouTube references, which is not what you'd usually find in a scientific paper. But to tell you honestly, you know, if you're looking at things to do with health or exercise, YouTube is a wonderful source. There's endless rubbish, but also some really good stuff. Okay, so you can check these out later if you're interested, of course. Okay. All right. Oh, and just to discourage me, that's a graph of how your grip strength from other people's experiments. Young Chi-Wan, okay. They experiment how grip strength actually gets weaker as you get older. How discouraging for me. Okay. Okay, next one, quickly.
Sorry to interject, Thor, but
Yeah.
would you like to take a 5 or 10 minutes break for the students as well?
Yeah, sure.
What do you reckon? What do you reckon?
Yeah, that's fine, because we're pretty well at the end of the talking bit, and there's a little bit about writing after this, yeah. Okay, that's fine. And if anybody wants to ask me questions, like I said, feel free. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Dạ các bạn ơi, thì bây giờ chúng ta sẽ nghỉ giữa giờ khoảng chừng 10 phút để các bạn có thể là grab a drink, hoặc là các bạn có thể là đi refresh một chút xíu ha. Rồi sau đó là chúng ta sẽ quay lại sau 10 phút nữa với phần writing và phần appendix. Thì các bạn đừng rời màn hình nha. Rồi cảm ơn các bạn, thì chúng ta sẽ quay trở lại phần này trong vòng 10 phút.
With STEM. Okay. Were the other people hearing me while I was talking then?
Yeah. Please continue because we post the recording during the break. So that's why we receive the recording when you start the session. So yeah, please proceed.
Okay, so we'll have a quick look at both general writing technique and STEM writing technique, but you cannot do good STEM writing technique unless you can also write well in a general way. Now, that's really important to understand. Okay, 60. So writing ability is a psychological habit. If you write often in any language, your writing will become easier and more fluent. You know, a lot of people say, oh, I can't write. But everyone can talk. And you learn as a kid to talk without thinking about it much. And, you know, writing comes down to the same thing. It's like walking and talking and running and jumping. The more you do of it, the more your brain gets used to it. It's a psychological habit. So when I was about 19, I had dreams of being a journalist. And for a while I worked with a newspaper, a big newspaper. And a famous journalist there once advised me how to write. He advised me to write 1,000 words a day on any topic for 100 days. You know, people say, oh, what can I write about? Where did you go today? What did you see when you walked out on the street? The lady you saw in the shop, you know, make up a story about her life. It doesn't matter. Or, you know, how was that car made? Anything at all, you know. You're learning to write. It's like doing an exercise. It's like doing exercise. So write 1,000 words a day on any topic. By the way, in any language, this habit you can transfer between languages, right? And he said, the first 100,000 words would be trash. And after that, I would be a writer. And he was correct. For me now, writing is as easy as talking, right? But I still have a copy of some of that stuff I wrote right at the beginning. And it's embarrassing, you know, it's so bad. But you learn to do it. Okay, next, 61. Now, when you're writing anything, a STEM paper, a novel, a story, a newspaper story, anything, you have to think of the people you are writing for. Your readers cannot read your mind. State your purpose clearly. Explain briefly what your article will discuss and what it will not discuss. And by the way, I know in East Asia, I know this is true of Chinese writing, in universities, for example, the style there is to go round and round and round and round the topic. And right at the very end, you say what you really mean. And postgraduate students coming to Australia from China and Japan and probably Vietnam often have trouble because they've learned this round and round and round stuff. In English writing, the style is you say what you're going to do and then you develop it, okay? The reader needs to be clear what you're trying to do from the start. Now, make your writing clear and interesting. And that will be different for different kinds of readers. Therefore, know who you are writing for. Look, I mentioned I worked on a newspaper when I was 19 years old, and that was a popular newspaper. It had a circulation of 1 million people every day in Sydney. And the editor used to shout at us. He'd come out and say, look, you know, the people who read this newspaper have a reading age of 12 years old. He was right. You know, your reading age goes up for most people, not everyone, not you, goes up until you're 14 years old, and then it drops for, you know, the majority of the population. So that newspaper, I had to make it very, very simple and clear, short sentences. In a STEM paper, you're writing for different kinds of people, aren't you? If they're colleagues in your profession, you can assume they know quite a lot. If you're writing science journalism for the general public, you'll have to explain a lot more. Okay? All right, 62. And organize any ideas you have before you write, and continue to organize or reorganize your ideas as you progress. You know, it's not a religious book, it's not sacred. You can change it, move things around, cross stuff out. Your ideas are developing. And when you think you have finished, you know, you'll say, yes, it's done. It's not finished. Put the paper away for a few days. Forget it. Go and have a holiday. Do something else. Forget it. And then come back later and look at the organization of ideas again. There will be things you want to change. Believe me, I speak from experience. You will always want to change things after you come back, after leaving it. All right, 63. Now, the best way to get ideas and to organize ideas is to make lists of questions and sub-questions and questions about the questions. And this applies to every stage of research and writing. And, you know, I officially retired in 2011, and I started a meetup called Active Thinking. And I assumed, even after teaching all those years, I assumed that the people who came to my meetup would be good at asking questions about big topics. I found out that very, very few people are good at asking questions. And therefore, they can't get good answers. They're used to being entertained. They're used to being told, right? But learn to ask questions. It's rare. It makes you a researcher. The answers you get will depend upon the questions you ask. A few people are very good at asking complex questions. You can learn to do it. By the way, if you go to YouTube and you put in how to ask questions, there are some YouTube presentations on doing that. I advise you to go and look at them. Some are not so good and some are very good, okay? So most people need a lot of practice. So what is your questioning skill level? Ask yourself, test yourself. Now, here's the stuff they hit you with in school, and you're probably quite good at this. Writing is a formal process. It's not like speaking. Speaking's here, speaking's gone. Writing lasts, unlike speech. Formal language mistakes become obvious. In speech, even a native speaker like me makes mistakes all the time. What do you call mistakes formally? But we're listening for meaning, it doesn't matter. But in writing, the mistakes become obvious. Language mistakes in your writing make you look less credible. It makes you look like a fool. less like an idiot, okay? That's not fair, but that's the social effect. So even if the ideas are good, if the grammar mistakes, things like that are there, they make you look silly. So always check your writing for grammar and style. Then recheck it and ask a friend to check it. And, you know, if you're rich, you might even hire a native speaker to check it. Okay? Depends how important it is. Now, what about STEM writing? Okay, what? So STEM writing technique. It's a STEM writer. A STEM writer is always neutral about a topic. A STEM writer is like a sports referee. You know, you're not on one side or the other side. You're trying to be balanced. You're trying to be fair. You're neutral. Now, a writer about religion or politics or social events, you mentioned the position of women. It's very hard for a writer to be neutral on that topic, okay? But if you want people to listen to you, you know, and you're writing in a scientific way, you have to be balanced even about emotional things. So when people are writing about social events, they'll usually have a personal opinion. And these writers usually use personal language, which supports their feelings. There's a place for that, you know, but it's not in scientific writing. A STEM writer will have personal writing, personal feelings, of course, but these feelings will not be part of his or her writing, right? That's hard sometimes, yeah? You have to control yourself. A STEM writer writes neutrally about facts, and you choose the facts neutrally too, and the ideas and the methods and the theories, okay? 66. Now, in every branch of science or technology or engineering or mathematics, or for me, linguistics, which is supposed to be the science of language, they have their own special conventions for writing about professional topics. They give meanings, special meanings to particular words, for example. So you have to read as many papers as you can in your field to become familiar with their style, with the language they use, with the way they're thinking. So ask yourself questions about how these papers are organized and what style of language they use. And do some practice, you know, make some practice, do some practice. We did a sample experiment today. Okay, you do something like that too. And then you can imitate the patterns in your field. And see, many STEM papers are written as part of a team rather than simply by one individual. This varies a lot. In math, maybe not so much. If you're doing a big scientific experiment in chemistry or something like that, almost certainly it'll be in a team. Okay, so STEM papers are often written as a team rather than simply by one individual. And if that applies in your field, you have to try to find researchers who've done writing as part of a team. That takes diplomacy. You know, you have to be careful. You have your ideas, you might have very strong ideas that we should do this, we should do that. You have to negotiate that. And also there's a cultural thing here too, which is important. Australian society pretends, wishes for everybody to be equal. That's not really true, but you know, we try to be a bit like that in workplaces too. Han will disagree with me, but it depends on the workplace you work in. But a lot of Australian workplaces, people are pretty equal. You know, the boss will use his first name. Good day, Dave. How's it today? And that comes through in a lot of research in a country like Australia or America too. You know who the lead researcher is. You know who the really smart people are. But they will deal with you often. They'll listen carefully to what you have to say, right? Now, I know a lot of researchers from China because I worked in China for 5 years. And China, and maybe Vietnam, is a very hierarchical country, you know? The boss says this, and everybody has to follow. And for some things, that works well. And for some things, it doesn't work so well. And in scientific research, sometimes it doesn't work so well because somebody who might be quite junior in your team might be very, very smart, you know, but they feel they have to shut up because the boss has this idea. That's something you'll have to negotiate yourself. But I'm warning you, if you come to a country like Australia or America, the pattern, the social pattern might be different, okay? All right, 67. The internet is your friend. When I began to do research, there was no internet. You know, you had to go to a library and try to find stuff that was useful. And that was often difficult, and there was a lot you couldn't get. So somewhere on the internet now is most human knowledge. The internet cannot write for you. Maybe you've heard of ChatGPT now in the last 3 months, yeah? It seems to write good English. That's an artificial intelligence program. It can't really write for you. People will use it to try to cheat, but it won't work in the long run. The internet cannot do research for you, not real research. However, the internet can help you to write and research. You just have to ask the right questions. And I mentioned this a few minutes ago, you know. If you ask the internet stupid questions, then you'll get stupid answers. If you ask smart questions, then you will usually get many answers. And some of the answers will be useful and some will not be useful. So you must become skilled at deciding what answers are useful and what answers are not useful. That's a trick. It's a trick in research, in science. Of course, it's also a trick in politics and life. You know, the internet is full of propaganda, for example. You have to find what's useful and what's not useful. Same in science. Okay, 68. So, for example, there's a general topic, writing a STEM paper. Oh my God, Google says it gives 144 million results. I don't believe it. Okay. Most of the results are useless. But some results are very useful, like that Indiana paper that I mentioned, on how to organize scientific writing. And you've got that reference already. By the way, do go and look at that Indiana paper. You know, don't just follow me. Don't be lazy. Check it for yourself. Check the other links too, okay? So I'm not going to repeat all that here. Okay, 68. Okay, let's see. So there was a little bit we were going to leave out, but maybe we can put this in. You've already had sessions on plagiarism, I know. It's worth repeating because there's a lot of plagiarism and it ruins science. It wastes everybody's time. Some people steal other people's writings from the internet. That's called plagiarism. Plagiarism is a crime. It can get you expelled from university, and does in Australia anyway, or it can lose you a job, sometimes years later, you know. This thing will get buried and somebody will bring it up and there's your reputation. There goes your job. Okay, 60, 70. There are some criminal companies on the internet, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, who will, for a fee, will write your essays. And this is a huge problem for universities now and research establishments, you know. They'll write research papers. They'll even get you a university degree. And you might think you're smart, but it's really a very, very stupid thing to do. As with plagiarism, you can lose your job, even more likely, you know, or your reputation. And, you know, only fools use these companies. If you leave college without learning anything really, you know, and you know no more than a labourer, you'll be useless in a professional job. Some people will make that mistake and learn the hard way. Okay, you don't need to go through that. 75, 71, 74. Okay, this is the results which you can look at later, okay, if you're interested in going through my bad statistics. Can we hop over to the, okay, the assignments. So as with anything, the very best way to learn how to do something is to do it. I suggested 3 assignments, either with real content or from other projects or attempting what I've done here. So here are several suggestions. Can we, okay. So go and find out in your own field, you know, some experiment that you would kind of like to do, you know, that you'd like to attempt. And, you know, make an outline of the steps you think will be necessary to achieve this project. There are different ways you can make outlines. When I began to write this paper, I put my ideas first on a memory map. And memory maps are very good for organizing tools. Probably you're familiar with them, right? There are free memory maps programs on the internet, so you can try using them. The one of, Han, can you switch 78? Yeah, that's the memory map I made. I guess it's too small for you to sort of read there, but you can get hold of the JPG later if you're interested. And that's a very useful way to do it. So as you see with what I did first was to do the big area on the memory map of, you know, how do you write it, the whole outline, and then on the other side I put, you know, what we're doing now, writing the English. So assignment 2, write the introduction and methods materials for a project you propose. You don't have to do the whole experiment if it's a big one, you know, but even writing an introduction and methods will give you an idea of how things work. And, you know, be very careful to self-edit, you know, put it away, go away for 2 days, come back, look at what you've written after the first draft. And even experienced researchers never get everything right in their first writing draft. So many students, you know, people, I've been teaching for 40 years, you know, university students, and they give me stuff and I look at it and say, you know, how many drafts did you do? Oh, well, they don't know what I'm talking about. They could have done a much better job if they'd gone and did a second draft, a third draft. Yeah. All right, 80. This is the end, I think. Yeah. There's quite a lot of research, and from my experience also, that for a teacher to just fix your mistakes doesn't really change a lot. It doesn't really help you that much. So my method now, if I'm a teacher, is to give a bit of writing that somebody like you has given me, and I break it up into a sort of a table. And on the left-hand side, when I look at each line, I can see some English mistakes, but I don't tell the person what the mistakes are. I just put a cross, one cross, one mistake, okay? And I say, okay, you fix it. I don't care how you find out. You can think about it. You can ask your friend. You can go and ask another teacher. I don't care. And probably you are annoyed. But that's good, because if you are annoyed, then it will become a little bit emotional, and you'll remember the mistake and you'll remember the correction. If I just do it, then you'll say, oh, thank you very much, and then you'll forget about it, right? Oh, and by the way, that little example I've given you there came from a student I taught in China in 1998. And 2 weeks ago, she wrote me an email and said, oh, do you remember me? And I said, no, I've taught thousands of students. And she was a person with a perfect memory. And, you know, she has just retired as a professor of mathematics in an American university. She's got a PhD in physics and a PhD in math. And in her email, she still made some English mistakes, but she survived as a PhD, as a professor in an American university, and still making some mistakes, right? But a very, very smart lady. All right, well, I think that's all we've got on these PowerPoint slides. I'd like you to try that little correction game amongst yourselves, you know. I won't help you, right? I told you it's useless for me to help you. It's very useful for other people, your friends, to help you, even if you're a little bit angry that you made a mistake. The emotion is useful for remembering the correction, right? All right, oh, that's about me. That's boring. That's not interesting, surely. I've been, okay, researching, lecturing, teaching forever. Not very good at any of it, okay, but I've just kept on going. Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, China. I've done short projects in Indonesia also, and the Solomon Islands. By the way, the PhD I finally did was on teaching, but I walked away from 2 PhDs in cognitive linguistics because I realized the models we were working with could not work. So there was a wasted life, okay? But I told you, so much research fails because you're trying to find out about complicated things. And sometimes you realize that the model is not going to work. So, you know, you bury it, you walk away from it and try another way. All right, Han, thanks for listening to me all this time. Where do we go from here? Do any of you?
I would say if they have any questions, they can just directly post it to you. Các bạn ơi, các anh chị và các bạn có câu hỏi nào chúng ta có thể đặt trực tiếp cho thầy May qua khung chat, hoặc là chúng ta mà biết lên hỏi luôn. Thì không biết mọi người có câu hỏi nào không ạ?
I might have one question.
Sure.
Yeah, hi, Professor. I want to ask one question about we learned that we need to practice every day to improve our writing ability, but I believe that writing is not really easy, like we just talking in English. So is there any way to make a first step and continue that step to every single next day?
Yes. Can I ask you, how much writing do you do in Vietnamese?
How much writing I'm doing Vietnamese?
Yes.
Actually, totally, I'm doing it in English right now. I'm in Taiwan,
Yeah,
in
no,
Vietnam.
but I
right now.
have a reason for asking. Do you do
I
much?
see.
Yeah. Do
Oh,
you do
no,
much?
I'm not.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, I find again and again, I ask students, how much writing do you do in Vietnamese or Chinese or in, Hindi? And they say, oh, you know, I write a shopping list or something. Writing is a psychological habit, you know.
Yes.
It's easier for you to get that habit in your first language first. Have to, but it's more of a struggle if you do it first in English. But believe me, you know, if you get the habit of writing a lot in Vietnamese, it will be a lot easier for you to write a lot in English.
That's true.
Yeah. As for every day, yeah, there's a, do you walk every day? Yeah, you walk every day, so walking's easier. You talk every day, so talking becomes easier.
Yes.
There's a theory that if you do something for 10,000 hours, then you become an expert, you know. So the more you do, the more often you do it, the easier it becomes. But yeah, don't just write shopping lists in Vietnamese. Keep a diary, do something. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much.
Right. More
Biết là chúng
questions?
ta còn có câu hỏi nào không ạ?
Hi, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for your sharing. I have a question related to the application of artificial intelligence in scientific writing. What do you think about it? And should we rely on AI when writing a research? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you know that this has become a very hot topic since about last December, when ChatGPT came online for everybody. Now it has many competitors. And of course, in special fields, AI is also used. There are many applications, AI applications for special fields. As with everything else, you know, AI is a tool that can be used or misused. Fire is a tool, a knife is a tool, you know, you can kill people with a knife. So AI is something similar. The version that comes from ChatGPT and versions, there are other programs that are coming online similar, look very, very tempting. Especially if you're beginning research. I mean, you put a question into ChatGPT and it will give you what looks like a reasonable answer. And if that is the beginning, but also the end of what you're trying to do, then you have failed. But you can use it to give you a starting idea. And don't believe everything that ChatGPT or those programs tell you, because they're really, they work with collocation. I don't know if you know what that means. They've assembled, you know, or collected and analyzed with artificial intelligence billions of English or not so many Vietnamese sentences, you know, that have been used by people. But the way they put them together might look like good English or good Vietnamese, but it might also be nonsense. Okay. Though I told you I walked away from 2 PhDs, and I was actually trying to research how the human brain makes language. That's a long story. But ChatGPT seems to be making English. It doesn't do that exactly. It would take more time than we have today to explain why. But I'm just sort of giving you a warning. Use it as a tool, you know. And if you can ask it smart questions and even say, I don't believe you, it will keep on giving you answers. That gives you hints. But don't just quote ChatGPT and programs like that. Copy and paste into your research. It will look stupid to specialists, and there are also programs now which can actually check that ChatGPT or some program like that is done by forensic linguistics. I won't go into that, it'll take too long. But all language has a pattern. The language you use in any language has a personal pattern. It's like your fingerprint, okay? And that can be tracked down. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really helpful.
Okay. Any more? Somebody else? Hello?
I have a personal question. So you have any books or any resources that on improving our writing that you will recommend to us?
Let's see. On my, I put everything I've written, all the respectable stuff anyway, on academia.edu. I've got a repository there. You've got the link to that. I should warn you that Academia Edu is not something that is not a resource that you can quote in your own research, for the exact reason that anybody can put anything on Academia Edu. Some of it is very good. I hope my stuff is not so terrible, okay? And some of it might be even propaganda or rubbish, okay? But I find that website, Academia Edu, very useful because anybody in the world can look at it. And, you know, in many countries which don't have large resources, large budgets, they can't afford to actually, even in the universities, they can't always afford to subscribe to all the best journals, you know? So in those countries, sometimes people who might be very good researchers can't get to the material easily, okay? So that's why I put everything on Academia. Some of it might be useful, so you could have a look at that. There's endless material out there for writing English. Also, even Google, you know, not Google, I mean YouTube, which is owned by Google anyway, has quite a lot of material now, more and more, billions of little YouTube videos, which are easy to take in and won't bore you to death all day, but you can often pick up very good ideas or useful hints. Again, there's a lot of rubbish, but there's also some very good stuff. Okay, by the way, with the stuff you find on my Academia Edu, some of it is straight research, and in that case, at the end of my articles, I'm giving real references, real academic references, and some of those you might find useful also. Yeah.
Thank you, Thor. Let's see. Yep. Okay, if there are no other questions, let's take a group photo before we end the session. Sorry, before we move on to the break, let's have like a group photo. Rồi, các anh chị và các bạn, chúng ta xin được mời các anh chị các bạn chúng ta cùng mở cam lên để chụp hình với thầy trước khi chúng ta có phần break ha. I'll probably allow 1 to 2
Some-
minutes for everyone
Okay.
to turn on their camera and have a group photo.
Nice to see you all at last.
Anyone else? It's good to know that they're still behind the computer. So, ok. Thì nếu mà không có chị nào bật camera chúng ta sẽ chụp hình luôn nha. Okay, let's go. Chị Hạnh chụp. Chị Hạnh cũng chụp giúp em nha.
Ok, để chị chụp hình này.
Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Very cool.
Okay.
That's good.
Well, I know some, but I hope I can meet some of you in the future as well. Thank you for listening for so long.
Thank you. And all the best with your future journey. I hope that we can meet up in Adelaide. I'm in Adelaide at the moment, so hopefully we'll have some time.
Well, some of you might come to Adelaide. If you do, I'm very happy to meet you. Come to my meetup.
Oh, when is your the critical thinker group meetup? Is it?
Oh, that is held in a cafe. During COVID, I was doing it online for a while, but at the moment I'm in a cafe every second Saturday. And I always
You can stop it. Sorry.
Yeah. With the meetup stuff, it's always online on the meetup.site. So I try to come up with new questions. I love making questions, so I come up with new questions about a topic each time. And then I try to find some internet references so people can get some background before we talk. And people in Adelaide are very lazy. They don't. But if you're interested, you're very welcome to look at those topics and questions and sometimes the comments I make, and you can even write to me, and disagree with me. I love people to disagree with me, because if everybody agrees, we don't learn anything, right?
True.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thor.
Okay. See ya. Bye-bye.